Well, police abusing their power is nothing new in South Africa. Every year, police in South Africa are accused of murders and brutality, and the claims, of course, were very intense during the tense days of the initial lockdown. A new investigation by Viewfinder has revealed that the transgressions are often enabled by the reluctance of police managers to discipline officers who have been implicated in crimes. The report outlines instances like the case of a 52-year-old man arrested for being drunk and disorderly. His family talks about the pain he was in after being kicked and beaten as he returned home in the throes of death, ultimately passing away. To discuss, we're joined by investigative journalist for Viewfinder, that's Daneel Knoetze. Mr. Knoetze, thank you for being with us. So tell us what you found, or basically the extent, I guess, to which police are protecting their own.
Right, thank you so much for having me. Yes, this is really the culmination findings of investigation which has been going on now for a little over 2 years by Viewfinder, in which I've been intimately involved. And what we've studied and investigated really is the system of police oversight in South Africa and the outcomes of the thousands of brutality allegations, including hundreds of deaths caused by police officers every year. And what we found in that system, in looking closer at the data and in the regulations and the laws governing it and the institutions indeed, is that even though we have an independent watchdog agency and the Independent Police Investigative Directorate in this country, the system really is reliant on police management taking forward findings and recommendations that IPID makes on the conclusion of its investigations of these crimes, or its investigations of these allegations. And what we found is that there's a systemic reluctance within police management to enforce these disciplinary recommendations. Many things happen to these cases other than police officers being held accountable once those recommendations are made. And what that means essentially is that officers, even accused of very serious transgressions, even officers against whom findings have been made, are either acquitted, their cases are thrown out, or they're left with very low sanctions when they are convicted on these charges and recycled essentially back onto the streets, back into the communities, unpunished relatively, and to become a scourge on those communities instead of serving them as they should.
Do you have any examples?
Well, the example that you mentioned is one that we've really championed as the worst case scenario of this systemic failure. What we found in that case in the Eastern Cape that you mentioned earlier, of a 52-year-old man that was allegedly beaten to death, or at least inflicted injuries that caused his death at a police station in front of eyewitnesses, is that there was actually a pattern of these kind of assaults emanating from that police station in rural Eastern Cape, in Whittlesea, that this particular group of police officers that were involved in that alleged killing had pending allegations against their names and disciplinary recommendations and findings. It's evident to us from the outcomes of these cases that police management failed to intervene, both with this particular group and with the problem at the police station in general, which comprised dozens of allegations of assault over a span of 2 or 3 years by those police officers. Yeah. That's one example that we brought up, but we can see from the data on these issues that pattern plays out across more than 1,000 or many of the more than 1,000 police stations in the country, and it's particularly bad in poor communities, we believe.
Yeah, I think it's good to zoom in on one case, and it sounds like this guy was just horrendously, brutally beaten. So are some of those officers still on the beat?
Well, what we found, and we really went deep into looking into that one specific case, what we found is that there was, in fact, a disciplinary hearing which resulted from the IPID recommendation. 5 of the 6 officers that were implicated were acquitted. We've seen the outcome report as Viewfinder, as IPID has done, because it receives it from the SABC, but these are usually very low on details as to what happened in that disciplinary hearing. These disciplinary hearings happen behind closed doors, and everybody involved in them are themselves police officers. So IPID, being the investigative agency, often is only left with an outcome, an acquittal, for instance, without really understanding what the basis for that decision was. It's difficult for us to say why these 5 officers were acquitted. One of the officers was convicted of misconduct in this instance, but the sanction was only a 2-month suspension without pay, and we've subsequently confirmed that that particular officer is still on duty at the police station where he was accused or implicated in a very, very brutal murder.
Yeah.
Again, this is not about a single case. We can see from the data and we can hear from the IPID investigators and officers and managers that we spoke to that this is a pattern that repeats across the country and is systemic indeed.
Yeah. So I mean, wow. And we're about to speak to IPID. So explain their role, maybe in this situation or in others. So I would believe that IPID can sometimes say that the officers should be dismissed, or IPID makes a finding on an officer involved in crime. But in this case, you say IPID then only recommended to the SABC that a disciplinary hearing was held, and then that was veiled, and nobody really knows why these officers got off. I mean, what is IPID's real role?
And you hit the nail on the head with this question, because that is exactly the anomaly and the incompatibility in between IPID's role in police oversight and police disciplinary regulations, which police interpret as allowing them to be the ultimate arbitrator of police accountability and oversight in terms of its departmental structures, whereas and its superseding power in this instance, according to the findings of our investigation, renders the independence and the effectiveness of the watchdog agency moot because of police management's ultimate power over these departmental processes and its ability indeed to thwart disciplinary recommendations against IPID. IPID's role, incidentally, is to investigate these cases and not to prosecute them.
All right, very interesting. That was investigative journalist from Viewfinder, Daneel Knoetze.